The pages of this classic book might look very familiar to you, hopefully so. Oh, the Places You'll Go. It's by Dr. Seuss, popular graduation gift as grads prepare for their next step and, flourishing in life. Seuss writes this, quote, "You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the one who'll decide where to go." Inspirational. As you might imagine, times are a little bit different from when the book was first published. If you can imagine, it was only back in 1990, but that was almost 30 years ago. We've heard a lot in recent years about things like millennials saddled with debt, not buying homes, not starting families because of this stuff. We talk a lot about our generation's financial situation, sometimes dire, but what about the financial situation of our families? What our parents did and accomplished? Turns out our families predict a lot about our lives. Despite what Dr. Seuss says, you might not be the one who decides all the places you'll go. It's because of something called the IGE, the intergenerational earnings elasticity. First tonight, what is IGE? And then how it impacts us.
Ever seen a child attached to a stretchable tether? The kiddo can only venture out as far as it stretches. That's how it works. Then they get tugged back by the natural pull. Tethers are really good at keeping kids close to parents. Turns out that's sort of how economic achievement works also. Economists study something called intergenerational earnings elasticity, or IGE. It looks at how our incomes drift from where our parents stood. If there is a perfect elasticity, it's 1.0, meaning there is no give in the tether. Parents with median incomes, they have kids with median incomes. Same for high and low income. By contrast, zero elasticity means a parent's income will not at all tell us anything about how much their child will earn. Zero elasticity. It's basically baby's day out. Market-based economies like the U.S. typically fall somewhere in the middle of the scale, but the trends are starting to change. And according to a 2012 analysis, America's IGE is pretty high, meaning how your parents did is a strong indicator of how you will do. The details start with a caveat. This analysis looks specifically at fathers and sons. It turns out elasticity is lower for daughters. They have more flexibility. In the father-son category, the American IGE was 0.47. That means nearly half of a son's income is pre-decided by his fathers. In the past, that was 0.3. Canada is 0.19. There, only 19% of the income advantage or disadvantage for one father is carried down to his son. Now keep in mind that statistics are not destiny. Individual kids can wiggle free from a tether, moving up or down the ladder. So is there anything we can do to increase American opportunity? A handful of researchers are trying to figure that out right now. One 2014 analysis compared American cities and found large variations. A child born in the bottom 20% in Charlotte, North Carolina, had a 4.4% chance of reaching the top 20%. In San Jose, a similar child's chances rose to 12.9%. Here we get to another caveat. Establishing causation is tricky, but they found 5 factors correlating with high mobility cities. Less residential segregation, less income inequality, better primary schools, greater social capital, and more family stability. Since then, a 2017 study found evidence that job networks, institutions like unions that might reduce inequality, and the tendency to marry a working spouse all played significant roles. So now the question is, will the economic tethers continue tightening in the U.S., or can we find a way to secure the American dream and make ourselves a little more mobile?
What does this mean for the American dream? That's the question. I'm sure you had it. I had it. The idea that your economic mobility and ability is tied to your work ethic and your grit, not your parents. Can we still make it in 2018? Is it possible? I spoke with Steve Horwitz. He's a professor of free enterprise at Ball State University. Professor Horwitz, most of us grew up thinking, if I work hard and go to college, I'm going to make a whole bunch of money and I'm going to do really well and definitely better than my parents. And today that's not necessarily always the case. We might be a lot more tied to our parents than we expected. Why, in your opinion, is that happening?
Well, I think a couple of things are going on. Certainly, one of the things we've always thought of as part of that process is buying a house, right? And that has become more difficult. And a lot of young people are just deciding they don't want to do it, right? And so, and those who are often beholden to their parents for a down payment or something like that. So that's a key piece of that puzzle. I think that has made that more difficult than it's been in the past.
Why are people born into affluence or poverty more likely to stay in those areas than the others?
Yeah. So certainly if you're born into affluence, you have ability to tap into resources, not just material resources, but social capital and things like that. So for example, if you lose a job, you probably know people who can hire you more easily, right? Those sorts of things. You've got connections, you've got people who take care of you. Sometimes that's not the case when we look at the bottom quintile. So certainly the stickiness of the top quintile doesn't surprise us that as much. Shouldn't surprise us that much. The stickiness of the lower quintiles, that's more complicated. I think a couple of things. Certainly, we have seen more regulation in the last few years that's made it difficult for people to start businesses and to sort of work out businesses out of their house. Occupational licensure, things like that, have regressive effects and have made it harder for poor folks to move up.
Let's say I work in technology, and right now there's a lot of technology firms, but let's say in the future it's kind of like with airlines, to where there are only effectively 4 or 5 that right. As an employee I don't have as much bargaining power.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think the question really is, some economists would argue that the numbers matter, right? Whether there's 3 firms or 2 firms, whatever. But other economists would say even with a small number of firms, their behavior matters. How competitive are they, right? I mean, we think, soft drinks, we think Coke and Pepsi, and there's just 2, but they're incredibly competitive in terms of how they advertise and so on. So I'm not sure numbers are the big deal there. And I also think given the overall demand for technology and the human capital that goes with it, I don't worry too much about that limiting people's mobility. I do think you can make an argument earlier down the line that ensuring that everyone's getting quality education, that everyone's prepared for an economy in which perhaps you might have to move jobs more often, right? That's a bigger issue, I think, than the sort of corporate power issue is by itself.
Fixes going forward, are they economic, policy, culture, all of the above?
Yes. Yeah, I think a little bit of everything. Certainly, I think when we think about upward mobility for the lowest quintiles, I was saying before, some of the ways in which we make it more difficult for people to move out. I didn't mention minimum wage laws, which do that as well, cut off the lower end of the job scale for many people. I think we need to focus on those things. I think we saw some attention for that from the Obama administration toward the end. And so certainly if we want to get folks moving up from the lower quintile, that's an important thing. And at the top, right, sort of the flip side of that at the top is we've got people who are making money through their connections and through crony capitalism, whatever word you want to use for it. And I think that that ossifies that structure at the top. It makes it harder to overturn through market forces. And so I think if we can loosen up that crony capitalism and get government out of the business of favoring certain firms, we'll see more movement at the top too.
If you want to read more about this, there was a great article in the Atlantic magazine. It's about the 9.9% and the stickiness of where we're born. About half of where you're going to go determined by your parents. It shocked me.